Gravity Falls, a show of humor, mystery, and casual viewing. Unless you're me. My name is Christian. You're probably wondering why I'm dressed as Dipper Pines and about to rewatch the entire series. Rest assured, there's a perfectly logical explanation. Right, now move on to Little Dipper. Just like another fun episode, kind of one and done story. We start the episode with getting in his room, trying to plot revenge on the Pines family, and eventually realizing that the best way to get revenge is by stealing the Mystery Shack itself. And then we cut to the Pines family at the Mystery Shack watching TV, and then they all hear a knock at the door, and then Stan goes to answer it, and then sees that it's a man telling him that he's won $10 million, and by telling Stan that the only way to get it is by signing a contract. So then Stan signs a contract, and then Gideon rips through the giant check, and then Gideon reveals that it was actually a trick to sign away the deed to the Mystery Shack. But then Stan turns tables again, and then says, "Look again." So then Gideon looks at the contract and sees it actually says "Suck a lemon, little man." So then Gideon gets upset and then vows to get revenge on Stan another time. The premise of this episode is that Dipper and Mabel are twins and they've always been kind of like the same height for all their lives, but then one morning Seuss actually measures Dipper and Mabel and then realizes that Mabel is actually like 1 millimeter taller than Dipper. So then Dipper's feeling all insecure about that. So then Dipper flips through the pages of journal number 3 and then discovers the existence of height altering crystals. Kind of goes into the forest and then sees these size altering crystals. He sees like if the sunlight affects it in a certain way. He sees like a small caterpillar turn into like a giant caterpillar, or sees like a cougar turn into like this like kind of like little cougar. So then he kind of like breaks off one of the crystals, put it on his flashlight, and experiments with it in his room. Makes like the little chess piece smaller and bigger, and then Mabel becomes suspicious that Dipper suddenly became taller, and then theorizes that there might be an invisible wizard in his closet. And then on the flip side, we get like the main story, which is Gideon continuing his rivalry with Stan, and trying to get into the Mystery Shack for the deed because he believes that there's some kind of like unlimited power. So he's trying to find ways to get rid of Stan and take over the Mystery Shack. So we get a lot of like hijinks involved in that. We get a few different like locations and characters that are introduced in this one. We get introduced to more of Gideon's home life. We get introduced to Mrs. Gleeful, who's pretty much just like this kind of like paranoid, neurotic woman who's like always saying like, just keep vacuuming, just keep vacuuming. It's like always in denial of like how horrible Gideon is. We actually get to see the Gleeful's auto sale that Bud works for, which is really cool. Alex Hirsch was saying that if we see a character more than once in the series, that more things get revealed about their characters. So I'm glad that we get to see more of the Gleeful household and everything. But then, as the story goes on, Dipper and Mabel fight over the flashlight, and then it ends up in Gideon's hands, and then shrinks Dipper and Mabel down to like a couple inches tall, with the intention of having as a threat to Stan to finally get a hold of the Mystery Shack deed. And then Gideon places them inside a bag of gummy koalas, and then interrogates the twins on where they learned about the crystal. But then Dipper blows an air horn in Gideon's ear, and then Gideon becomes furious. And then of course, like Dipper and Mabel are trying to find a way to, get themselves to a regular height and, warn Stan. They have their whole kind of like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids kind of adventure of like trying to get out of getting Gleeful's house and then back to the Mystery Shack. And they're able to escape by using a strand of Gideon's hair that they found in one of his brushes, and then tie it to one of the balloons from the Gleeful auto sale, and they use it to fly it back to the shack. And one of the B stories is that Stan tries to open up like a hall of mirrors, and Gideon kind of tries to go into the hall of mirrors and tries to like find Stan within it, but then he accidentally hits Seuss because he has the fez on, because we had an earlier scene of Stan taking off the fez and then Seuss putting on the fez, kind of establishing his dream of wanting to run the Mystery Shack one day. So then he accidentally shrinks Seuss, and at the same time Dipper and Mabel kind of finally arrive at the Mystery Shack, and then Mabel tries to distract Gideon by messing up his hair, and then they prepare to enlarge Dipper again, but then Mabel becomes suspicious and thinks that Dipper is just going to make himself taller than Mabel again. So then they start arguing again, and then Gideon recaptures them by putting them in a jar and then putting it into his pocket. And while Dipper and Mabel are inside the jar, Dipper asks Mabel why she and Stan keep teasing him about his height, and then Mabel admits that she's always frustrated with Dipper because of the fact that he beats her at everything, and that she wanted to win at something for once, which is a reference to the fact that when Alex Hirsch was a kid, his twin sister Ariel Hirsch was always frustrated with the fact that he beat her at everything. They reconcile with each other and then work together to escape, and they eventually climb out of Gideon's pocket and then into like his neck, and they try to like tickle him, and then that provides a way for Stan to get the upper hand on Gideon, kind of like kicks him out of the doorway and kind of gets rid of him. And Dipper and Mabel get a hold of the crystal again. They restore themselves to a regular height, also with Dipper ending up being a millimeter shorter than Mabel, kind of resolve that whole issue and everything. So I think that was a really fun idea that they did that. And then Mabel stomps on the crystal to destroy it, but then they look down the crystal shards and see that the shrunken Seuss form the words "help Seuss." So then they try to fix the crystal to restore him to his normal size. There's this whole end credits joke where these TV personalities present Grunkle Stan with this giant check, but Grunkle Stan thinks it's fake, so he decides to kind of slams the door on them. And then the TV presenters kind of hand it to the first person they see, and then it's Old Man McGucket, who takes like a big bite out of it and acts all crazy and stuff like that. So I think that was really fun. And we actually get Old Man McGucket's full name, name, which is Fiddler H. McGucket, and later down the line, we realize that the H stands for Hadron, so I think that's really fun. We also get a cryptogram at the end, which translates to the Invisible Wizard's watching, which is a reference to the line that Mabel had earlier about her suspicions that Dipper was able to grow due to an invisible wizard helping him. But yeah, overall, yeah, just like a fun episode. You know, we get a little bit more background into a couple of characters and a little bit more kind of setup for storylines that we'll get later down the line.